Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, Season 3, the show where I read the Tanakh and provide my own interpretations of what I think it all means. This week's episode falls on the 24th of Cheshvan, 5786, November 15th, 2025. This portion for Chayei Sarah. We're going to be going through a quick overview of the different things that happen in the portion, and then I'm going to focus on some specific topics that caught my eye, subjects of interest that I wanted to elaborate on. If you'd like to hear a full reading of the portion, you can go ahead and listen to that episode for Chayei Sarah in Season 1 of the Weekly Parashahcast. But without further ado, let's jump on in. I'd like to remind everybody I'm not a professional scholar, just somebody who wanted to study the Torah. All right, let's start. So this begins in the book of Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 23, and it starts off with the passing of Sarah at 127 years old. Now from here, Abraham gets up and he looks for where he can secure some land to bury her, and he ends up talking to the sons of Het, tells them that I'm a sojourner, I'm an alien in the land, and I want to bury my dead. I need to acquire some land. And so he goes along, and after the sons of Heth tell him, oh, you're such a great guy, none of us would withhold the land from you, he then asks the entire congregation, if you will, of the locals, and he's asking the Hittites. Now, the Hittites, among them, there is land owned by a guy named Ephron. So Ephron ultimately will sell Abraham the land. Now, as we may recall, the negotiations are kind of funny because Ephron says, oh, please, Abraham, take it as a gift. Let me give it to you. And Abraham says, no, I would prefer, as he lowers his head, I'd prefer to purchase it. And he says, oh, please, what's 400 shekels of silver between you and me? And Abraham goes, okay, I will pay that exact amount, and I'm paying for it. It's not going to be free. So everybody witnesses this transaction. The cave of Machpelah is where the grave will be, as well as the surrounds, the trees, and everything in that little plot. So this is where the patriarchs and matriarchs will be buried. Now, with that all considered, Abraham continues along on his journey, his life, and so on, after he buries Sarah, and he is concerned that his son Isaac does not yet have a wife, so he calls out to his servant Eliezer and says, Eliezer, I'm going to send you on a mission. I don't want my son to take a wife from these Canaanites. Go back to my home, to my kin, and bring a wife from there for my son Isaac. And Eliezer is concerned. He says, if I'm not successful, what happens? And he says, if you don't succeed, if she refuses to go with you, then you are not going to be bound to this order, but I want you to swear an oath to me that you will do this thing I'm asking of you. And so the way he swears the oath, it says that he swears below Abraham's thigh. I've seen interpretations say that this is because of the circumcision, making that like a holy thing to swear upon. Nevertheless, Abraham and Eliezer established this covenant between them that he will fulfill the oath and go get a wife, or at least try to get a wife for Isaac. Eliezer then departs. An angel goes before him. Abraham makes sure an angel goes and kind of plans ahead. He gets to where he's going, which is going to be the land of the Arameans, right, where he comes across a village of women coming out at this time to get the water for their community, right? They're going to the well. And so he realizes this is the place I want to be. He starts praying to God, please let me be successful. Let me find a woman that will be a good wife for Isaac, and let her be somebody who, when I ask if I can drink water, she'll say, not only you can drink water, but also let me take care of your camels. A woman, before he even finishes saying this prayer in his heart, does this. It's Rivka, and he then gives her presents. He asks to stay with her family, and then finds out this girl is related to Abraham. So this miracle, Eliezer immediately found the kinsman that he was supposed to seek out. He tells the miracle to Rivka. She runs home and tells her family. She comes home to them wearing a beautiful nose ring and a gold armband. So she's all decked out in beautiful jewels and trinkets. And this catches their, oh, okay, she's going to be bringing over a wealthy guest. Eliezer arrives, and her brother Laban, comes and says, oh, come in, rich man. Please, be our guest. We've got space for your camels. We've cleaned up. It's lovely for you. And so he tells them all why he's there. He says, my master is Abraham. He is your relative. I came here and I prayed, and behold, Rivka appeared. I need a woman to be the wife of my master's son. So this is that time. Please come with me tonight. Let's get going. And they ultimately do consent to her marrying, but they say, let her stay for 10 days so we can really say goodbye. And Eliezer says, do not delay this thing that God has put before me. In other words, this is supposed to happen. Don't delay the will of God. We need to leave right away. So the next morning they leave, and they give her a blessing that she will be the mother of descendants who will conquer their enemies, right? They will seize the gates of their enemies. And this blessing is a lovely blessing that will ultimately come true. In any case, they depart. Eliezer brings Sarah. She sees Isaac walking in the field, and it's described basically as love at first sight. Now, Isaac had been very sad because of his mother's passing. It also remarks that the presence of Rivka, seeing her, getting to marry her, being with her, eased the pain of grief that he had from losing his mother. Now, after all of this, we also find out that Abraham did indeed take on additional wives, an additional wife named Keturah. And Keturah gives him several more children: Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. And so these names are very important, particularly Midian. We hear about the Midianites many times, and that will be consistent throughout not just Jewish history in the Torah, but also Greco-Persian history, since they say the Persians are the Midianites' descendants and so on. In any case, it says that Abraham lived 175 years. He died at a satisfying old age, gathered to his peoples, and it says that Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, that's with Sarah. They buried him there, and that's how he says his farewell. Now, it's beautiful to me. I said this the first time I read as well, the fact that the two brothers are together. We'll talk about that some in a little bit. The last thing I'll mention here is it tells us about Ishmael's descendants, his son from Hagar, his firstborn son. He has descendants as well. It describes 12 tribes born of Ishmael. So that's the general summary of the chapter. Again, a very abridged version just to recap, but you can check out the full reading from Season 1. I'm going to now focus on a couple of the elements that I thought were particularly interesting to me that were worth discussing. So the first thing I want to talk about is, of course, the purchase of the land. Now, Abraham is wise, and he knows that to be given a gift, right, he refuses after he saves Lot to be receiving any gifts, because we don't want people saying, well, I made you, I gave you what you have. So instead, he formally procures the land by purchase, thus making it officially his property. He is not a roaming vagrant anymore. He is a person who is sojourning in the land with a permanent plot of land. Everybody witnesses this. This is important. Now, I've seen also that the guy who sells him the land, I've seen an interesting remark that him pointing out, what's a 400 shekel plot of land, is basically his subtle way of saying it's going to cost you 400. Whatever the case, they settle the deal. Beautiful stuff. Now, interesting to me is the fact that this group of people are Hittites. The Hittites, if we recall, are among the tribes that the Israelites are commanded to destroy when they come into the Holy Land. So, what's the deal here? The Hittites are here with Abraham, dealing with Abraham, just as the Canaanites and others were. But it's very interesting to me that these people who will eventually be given, this great declaration of death to be annihilated, are here with Abraham. And they're dealing with Abraham, and they're respectful to Abraham. They seem to deal kindly with Abraham. They like Abraham. right? Everybody likes him there. They recognize that he's blessed. They like Abraham enough to treat him so well, and he, of course, lowers his head to them as well. And everything is very good about his relationship with them, so it seems. The sons of Heth, of course, they honor him as a prince of God, and he's just got a great relationship with them. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is something that caught my eye when I was going through the books of Kings, is that David, his wife Bathsheba, was previously married to Uriah the Hittite. Now, of course, we know if the commands were to annihilate all the different tribes and groups that were of the Canaanites, Jebusites, Hittites, etc., why are there still Hittites? Why is it that Israel did not successfully conquer and destroy the Hittites? Was it because they were soft? Maybe. But I almost feel as though there's something more here if we look at it from this perspective of their affiliation with Abraham. Uriah the Hittite was a faithful soldier of King David. He was killed by David, but he was still nevertheless faithful. And indeed, it also lists him among the great men of that generation, the great honored soldiers and so on. He is listed, I believe, as the last one. So we hear that Uriah the Hittite, of the Hittites, is special even in Jerusalem. To me, this is significant because the cave of Machpelah is purchased. It's sacred ground. This land of the Hittites, if you will, becomes the land of Abraham and his grave. And fast forward, Hittites will be dwelling amongst the kingdom of Jerusalem, of Judea, the kingdom of David. The Hittites are still there. So perhaps, for the sake of this kindness between Abraham and these people, the Hittites were spared, and that's why the Israelites didn't destroy them. That's just me thinking about this in a long-term perspective, with the relationship between these Hittites who will later be marked for death, but seem to have survived. Just a thought. Moving along from there, we also hear about Eliezer praying for the answer to his circumstances with finding the wife for Isaac. It has been noted by scholars I've read before, as well as just general in this text. He himself says, before I even finished this prayer in my heart, she appeared. So this prayer was so strong, and everything about it was so meant to be, that God answered the prayer before he could finish praying. But also, what I really like about this is the phrasing that he prayed in his heart. Why do I bring this up? Well, prayer, spoken word, is of course what people generally associate when you're praying, right? You say it out loud. You say the blessing, you say the prayer. But we also see here that prayer can be heard on the inside. A person does not need to speak a prayer in order for the prayer to be heard. What does that mean? Well, Sarah, when she laughed in her heart and doubted that she would have a child, this too is a fine example of God being able to hear what is in the hearts of people. So, I want to make a point about this. Just because you don't necessarily pray out loud, that doesn't mean God won't hear your prayers. This tells us quite the opposite. Now, yes, Abraham did set him up for success by sending an angel ahead of him, right? That was what happened, that an angel went before Eliezer. But the reality is his prayer was answered before it was finished, and it was a prayer in his heart, not out loud. So even if you are unable to pray out loud, or if you feel some type of way, your prayers that are quiet but in your heart can still be heard. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, another thing to note is when she does go agree to be with Eliezer on this journey, right? She'll go with him right away. Well, let it be her choice, or she decides, I will go. There is a parallel in the story here. There are actually a couple of parallels in Genesis, particularly related to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and the story of whether or not Rivka will leave when it's time to leave. So, remember in the book of Judges, this is, I think, the last chapter. It's quite terrible. It describes a civil war between, I believe, the Benjamites and everyone else. There were a bunch of guys who were from this one town, and they took the wife of, or the concubine of a Kohen who was passing through, or he was a Levite, rather. He's passing through, and he stays with the father-in-law way too long. The father-in-law every day doesn't want to really send his daughter away, so he keeps stalling this Levite, saying, "Oh, hey, why don't you stay the night?" And then the next day, "Well, let's have a feast. It'll be great." "Oh, it's already so late in the day. Come on, stay the night." And he does this repeatedly until finally on the last day, he says, "We're not staying overnight. We're leaving." But because they leave so late in the day, they end up kind of getting caught with their pants down. Not literally, though unfortunately that is what happens. They get caught in the circumstances where they need to seek lodging, and something horrible happens. Something unbelievable. One of the worst things that is documented in the Tanakh happens to this woman. She's offered up to the wolves, basically, and they brutalize her in all sorts of horrible ways. And so what do we see here? When Eliezer says, "It's time for me to bring you back, let's not delay a matter that's been decided by God," she says, "I will go." That was not the case for this woman and the Levite. So we see here the importance: do not delay on your journey. Go. If you have a mission to fulfill, go fulfill your mission, especially if God ordains it. Continuing from here, Rebekah's blessing that she receives regarding her children. This is interesting. So we know that Isaac did not get a blessing from Abraham, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But Rebekah gets a blessing that her children will be basically conquerors, that they will defeat their enemies. And this is what happens. Esav in particular, the firstborn, he is a warrior. He is a hunter. He is the type to receive this blessing. So is Israel in the long term, but Esav, he is the firstborn, and he is this kind of warrior, warmonger person who will do exactly what the blessing of his relatives would ultimately be fulfilling. So that's the note regarding Esav and the blessing given to Rivkah. We go back to Abraham after, of course, Rebekah and Isaac get married. Some notes I mentioned before that Abraham fathers additional children with Keturah. Among them is the name Midian, so we can see the ancestor of the Midianites through Abraham. While they're still living, it says that Abraham sent them away with gifts. So basically, he gave them their inheritance that they would have gotten before he died. He says, "All right, my boy, well, here's your money, and here's your present, or whatever, and go off on your merry way, and good luck." But Isaac ends up receiving the actual inheritance of whatever's left in Abraham's house. Ishmael is back. Ishmael buries Abraham alongside Isaac. The two brothers do this together, presumably in peace. And Ishmael has already been the father, or in the process of becoming the father, of 12 different nations, 12 tribes, 12 princes. So we see again the relationship, Ishmael having 12 tribes, Israel having 12 tribes. 12 seems to be a special number. Putting that aside, the relationship is that Abraham does not give the blessing to Isaac himself. It is typical, we see with Isaac blessing his sons and Israel blessing his sons. There are blessings given to one son. But Abraham does not do this. Why not? Well, my belief, if I had to think of a reason, is that Abraham still had love for Ishmael. And for him to expressly do this blessing would be to not show love for Ishmael. So by refusing to do it, perhaps he delegated the responsibility of the blessing to being in God's hands. Rather than saying, "I give the blessing I have onto you, Isaac," he lets himself die. God will then bless Isaac in his stead, which is probably the best decision because now there's no hostility. We see very clearly between Esav and Yaakov, that there is hostility over these blessings. Abraham does not give a blessing. Therefore, Ishmael and Isaac are able to be together as brothers without that enmity between them. At least as far as we can tell, there's no hardship and there's no bad blood. They both bury Abraham hand in hand as brothers. So perhaps that is the reason that Abraham chose not to bless Isaac, because instead, let God handle it. Let me not put a wedge between my two sons. I want to remind again that Abraham repeatedly, it demonstrates that he loves Ishmael. Ishmael is his boy, his first son. And Isaac will also see has the same attitude toward Esav. He loves his firstborn son the most. It's clear he prefers Esav. Abraham probably preferred Ishmael. We don't know this out loud. He doesn't say this. Everything is left to Isaac because that's what Sarah wanted. But Ishmael was cast away, and Abraham never liked that. He never liked that happening to his son. He loved his son. He was greatly troubled by the way his son was being treated. But he ultimately obeyed because God told him to do so. So in doing this, he has effectively prevented there being a hardship between Isaac and Ishmael more than there already would have been. There is no discussion of blessing, only of inheritances. And as we see here, the two brothers are able to do this final act for their father in peace. I always look at this as being the most significant verse when it comes to the relationship between the Arab world and the Jewish world, is that ultimately it shall be so that the children of Israel, who are children of Isaac, will gather and together with the children of Ishmael have peace at the end of the journey. Factor in Esav, and we get a similar deal. But I've always found this to be the most probably important verse related to the current affairs, especially with Islam and its relationship and open declaration that Islam is the descendants, they come from Ishmael. This relationship means that the Jews, right, the Israelites, Bnei Israel, and the Muslims should be like Ishmael and Isaac. They should be, instead of enemies, they should be brothers. They should stand side by side. This is the ultimate culmination of the relationship of the sons of Abraham, and God willing, it will be so. Here is to the future peace between those sons of Abraham. Until next time, this has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast Season 3 saying thank you for listening. I hope you'll tune in next time. And until then, as always, Baruch Hashem.